some of my fellow alumni, even my friends from my home church are now, this just shows the severity of the fallout from Bethel's theology. She's now a practicing witch, and she is married to another fellow Bethel alumni who first they were a lesbian couple and then it became a transgender couple. Wow. And she was a youth pastor while practicing as a witch, which I don't know how that works. Wow.
So Jesse, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to hear about your time at Bethel.
Yeah, so I went to Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, did 3 years there, so it's a 3-year program.
Hi, this is Steve Kozar. That's me on the right there at that round table. And Jesse Westwood is the guy who was just talking. And I'm going to play for you an extensive interview I did with him a week or two ago. And he had a long experience being involved with Bethel music and with churches associated with Bethel. And there's a lot of really super interesting things he has to say. And I don't want you to think that this is a sensational video just trying to grab people's attention for the sake of grabbing their attention. This is a video to grab your attention so that you can be aware of some really dangerous teachings that have done great damage to a number of lives of young people who were supposed to be learning about Christ and becoming more strong in their Christian faith, when in fact it killed their faith. I really want to encourage you to have an open mind to some of the things that you're about to hear. And I also want to mention that there were some synchronization problems with the software that I used to record this. So sometimes I had to cut things out, or you don't see one of our faces, or the words don't quite match up to what our lips are doing. But overall, this was a really good interview in spite of those technical difficulties. I'm going to play just a few more clips here, and then I'll get into the full interview.
A very large handful of my fellow alumni have left the faith. Because you're leading worship, not believing anything in this stuff, but I'm thinking, well, if I just do the right thing, I know how to craft a good set, I know how to set up a good, what instruments to use, what songs to do, what moments to hit, I know I can pre-write some prophetic moments that would seem like prophetic moments, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, I know how to do this stuff. And and if it works, it works. I don't have to tell anyone I'm an atheist and leading worship, I'm just going to keep rolling along. Well, I did, and everyone was like, wow, it was so good. It was so amazing. I felt God in that moment. That was amazing. That was so good, Jesse. And that set just hit me in the right way. Wow, you are hearing God in these ways. And I'm like, sure. But I'm not. I'm literally just faking it. I'm faking everything. For 4 months I did this. And it was and then when we watched American Gospel and going through all that and all the things, just I was finally able to say, okay, I think I could be a Christian again. I think I can. This all sounds right. I need this. That gospel. I need that gospel. This gospel that takes the weight off of me. I can do that. And that, at the end of that, at the end of that, I guess every time, Haley and I were just sitting there bawling our eyes out, just so mad, so mad at the years wasted, at the cheap bill of goods we've been sold, just the amount of time we spent chasing this thing and trying to make it work, and then hearing the gospel for the first, the real gospel for the first time in 20 years, I guess, of my life as a Christian. I was just wrecked. I was wrecked. I'm like, this is incredible. How have I not heard this before? How has no one mentioned this before? At Bethel, at the churches, at all the conferences I've been to, I sat under preachings of Sean Boltz and Wesley Dave Campbell and Bob Jones and Bobby Connor, and you name the NAR pillar, the NAR bigwig, I either led worship at one of those conferences or I was there.
Okay, I'm going to just start. Hey everybody, this is Steve Kozar. Yeah. I'm talking to Jesse Westwood. We already got started. I pushed the record button, and your YouTube channel will be called...
I think we're just gonna do the Westwoods.
Okay,
you'll have the link. You'll have the link when it goes up. If the name's not taken, it'll be the Westwoods.
I'm gonna take some time to edit this. We're talking the day before Thanksgiving. My guess is this video will not be posted until next week. So
okay,
your YouTube channel will hopefully be up.
Yeah, a bunch of videos up there already. So
we're gonna just kind of casually talk and see where this goes. We met earlier this year in Cleveland. It just so happened that you were scheduled to go do an interview session with Brandon Kimber, and it coincided with me and Chris Roseborough and Amy Spreeman being there.
Yes, which was amazing.
That was really neat. I think that was one of those sovereign things where
I would say so.
Yeah. Why don't you just talk about what did that feel like for you, and kind of the steps that got you from the place where you were to where you wound up in Cleveland with Steve Kozar and Chris Roseborough?
Well, I mean, first things first, I was so excited when I heard it was going to be you guys, because you guys, I mean, between you, Apologia, and Chris was like really the big, the channels, the kind of the top 3 channels I would watch when I was working through all this stuff. And so first I thought like, oh, I get to meet the guy who did American Gospel, which also that, rocked our world coming out of it. And so when I heard that you guys were going to be there, I was definitely freaking out because I was like, oh my gosh, these are the guys I've been following. And I thought it'd be like, years between it before I get to even a chance to talk to you guys. Cause just to say thank you, like right off the bat to you, like your videos and Chris's videos have helped so much in the process. And, so I was so excited to do that, but from getting to Cleveland to, prior, it's been quite the process. It's been about, I don't know, probably 2 to 5 years, maybe. If you break it off in different sections, start off with just leaving the general NAR movement, which I didn't know was called the NAR movement at the time. It was just me. It was just leaving church in general, to going through an atheist phase for a couple years, really working through that, to then kind of creeping back into the faith, to then landing in a more traditional Reformed theology, and then really starting to flesh things out again. It was quite the process, I mean, really, how far do you want me to go? Do you want to start from,
I should just say up front that you have a very, deep background in the world of Bethel.
Yeah.
That's where you came out of.
Yeah. And we kind of start there, is that like, I did go to Bethel. I went there right after high school. I was 17. And
give me the years. It helps me to visualize.
2000. So I just graduated high school, 2008. It was that summer, and I didn't even turn 18 yet. I actually turned 18 the month I moved out in July, it was. We got out there, and I went not for any reason other than I didn't want to stay in Delaware. For me, it was like I didn't want to do college because I didn't know what to do, and I was terrified of the bill I saw when I came to college.
So you didn't just go to Bethel; you went to the Bethel Supernatural School of Ministry. Is that correct?
Yes, the home base in Reading.
Yeah.
So I went right out there, and I honestly didn't hear any Bill sermons. I didn't hear any Jesus Culture music. I didn't hear anything.
Wait. Before you went?
Before I went.
Wow.
I didn't read any books or nothing. So I literally only went because my parents, my mom and my pastor went down to Lakeland Revival. That was that summer out in Florida.
Yeah.
They saw some Bethel students there, and they're like, these kids are amazing. They're a school out in Reading. That's kind of how they heard about Bethel. And they had a lot of good interactions with them. And so then it was like, you guys should consider this. And so we started, thinking about it, and it got closer and closer to figure out what I would do. And my parents, God bless them, they're like, listen, you don't have to go to college. Just don't do nothing. Just figure out, be intentional with your time. That's all they asked. At the time, Bethel was only like $3,000 to go to school. And I'm like, we can figure out $3,000. That's fine. It's pretty easy to do. And, it was for a whole summer. We just had to pay for your own housing, which I got a job out there and stuff and did all that. And I was like, sweet, I get to move to California. I didn't even know where in California it was. I thought I was going to be like San Francisco. Yeah. And when we got landed in Sacramento, I thought California is sweet. And when we got there, we started going north, and I'm like, wait, why are we going north? Yeah. I am the most unprepared person, like when it came to this. And so we get out there, and even my first Sunday there, like I didn't know how big of a deal Bethel was becoming. I just thought it was a cool school that believed the same stuff my church believed, and healings and miracles, but they had it down to a system, basically. That's a general, like, they had it down to a system. They could teach you how to do it and get better at it. I was like, cool, sounds great. I would love to do it. Two of my other friends ended up coming as well from my church. We all went out there. My first day at the school or at the service, I just walked up on the stage, say hi to people. because I'm used to that. Oh, sorry, I'm used to that in my church, like how we would just walk up and it's a stage, and they're like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a student here. I just want to see how do you get on the worship team?" And it's like Chris Kilala, Kim Walker, like all the big names are up there. And they're like, "Yeah, you shouldn't be up here, But I didn't know. Like, I just didn't know. And so the first Bill Johnson sermon I heard was my first day at school. And I just kind of, dove head first into it. So,
but the typical antennas of discernment that Christians should have were never even there to begin with.
No, because that's all I knew. Like, I grew up very much in the charismatic church. Like, I grew up, my grandmother was the choir director at the local Methodist church for 40 years. That's how I got into worship and music. And if you know the Methodist background, they're known for their tent revivals. That's kind of what they did, and how they got started. At least my understanding. But they're obviously not big revival churches anymore. And then I went to a Mennonite private school, and Mennonite is they actually, the Amish technically split from the Mennonite, and they're confessional baptism at an appropriate age. No, not infant baptism. That was the big split. But anyways, that's where I grew up. I grew up going to that school, but I went to a Methodist church until I was about 7 or 8, and then the pastor of the church that I grew up at, he then started a church, which was the Charismatic church that I then went to from like 8 years old on. So 8 years old on. I just grew up at that church basically. So, and that's where I cut my teeth really getting into church and getting into all that stuff. So yeah. So I had no like discernment for like the difference between the theologies.
So let me, I'm trying to remember your age and think about my own kids.
Yeah, I'm 32.
Okay, so you're the same age as my son Andrew, and I've been saying for a while now that the problem with the New Apostolic Reformation is that there is a whole group, and you are the poster boy. From what you're saying, there's a whole group of people who that's all they know. Yeah. So they don't. Yeah. They're not weighing things out because there's nothing to weigh out. That's all they know.
No. Yeah, exactly. That's you nailed it. There was no red flags for me because I'm like, I just knew my church operated gift like the tongues and the gifts of the spirit and healing and all that stuff. Like that was just normal. Bethel was just like a more expensive, refined, nicer version on the West Coast that looked better and had cooler people.
Had better coffee.
Better coffee at the time, all that stuff. So,
what about the? What happened with Todd Bentley at Lakeland? Were you familiar with what was going on and what a train wreck that was, or did that?
Yeah, I mean, not as much. Yeah, so when I got my first week in school, the second year students are allowed to minister up on stage and stuff, and do like the prayer team. First year students are allowed to. So a lot of the second year students would come back and they would do like impartation services from the Lakeland Revival because a whole bunch of them flew out there and then came back and like, we're impart what happened in Lakeland here at Bethel, and and so there really wasn't much chatter about it. I didn't really hear much about Lakeland until, I mean, not too far after it. It was probably a month or a couple. Gosh, it must have been like 6 or 7 months afterwards, just because we were so involved in school and stuff. It would come up every now and then, but it wasn't like let's just pray for them, and that was kind of the extent of it. So,
I'm always trying to point people back to these really foundational things where if you're going to be serious about your faith and you're going to be participating in a particular movement with a particular theology.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that named that whole thing the Charismatic Day of Infamy. Mm-hmm. Because the guy who gave the movement its name, the guy who kind of saw this giant signs and wonders charismatic church with the distinctive beliefs being the renewal of apostles and prophets and the idea that signs and wonders would become ordinary again, and some of those characteristics. That was C. Peter Wagner. He's on stage and he's calling Shayon and Bill Johnson and who was the third guy on stage?
Bill and Carol Arnott.
Was it
Wes and Stacy?
They were there, but who was the guy that he?
Bill Arnott's
was
Toronto. So Bill Arnott is part of that. Bill and Carol, and
not Bill.
And Wes and Stacy Campbell, not Bill. John Arnott. John and Carol Arnott. That's right. Yeah.
But they were all declared to be. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Todd Bentley is the real
Yep.
deal. This is going to bring in the great revival that we've all been talking about. It was prophesied by Bob Jones. It was prophesied by Paul Cain that this is the thing. And it's never going to end. It's going to go all around the world. And then it ended in a couple of months in an absolute disgrace. So if Bill Johnson really is an apostle, how did he not know that? How come the Holy Spirit never told any of these people?
Yeah. Well, it's like that, and just like the whole, and that's part of like kind of the death of a thousand cuts when it came to the charismatic movement. For me, was a lot of that stuff where it'd be like you would see. For me, it was more the prophecy where like, and that's part of it, like prophesying. Like all these people be prophesying stuff like this is going to happen, or prophesying things to friends or whoever it may be, and then you don't see things happen, right? And there's no accountability. There's no follow up. There's just, you celebrate it when there's like someone spot on, like when someone nails it or reads your mail. Bob Hartley was one of the guys. He came out of IHOP under Bob Jones. He was kind of before Sean Bolts came up, and Bob Hartley would come and he would read people's mail, that kind of thing. I remember I recorded one for my friend. My friend who was the little brother of Stephanie Gretzinger, who was my roommate. So like I was really, just for people to know, like I was really tied into Bethel. Like the year I went was like when all the big names were there, like Stephanie Frizzell, who became Stephanie Gretzinger, Will Matthews, Matthew, I forget his last name. He's the guy I wrote, This Is What You Do, This Is What You Do, Make Me Come Alive. Christy DeMarco, like all those people were like, that was in my class, and like people I was really close with. Some really close with, but like, you have all these big prophets coming out and they'll read your mail and everyone's amazing, but then it's cool when they nail it, but then it's like, well, did it come to pass though? Like, I got so many words of like, oh, you're going to be, my name's Jesse. So they'd be like, I can't tell a prophecy I got, Jesse, you're going to be the father of David. You're going to raise up worship leaders. You're going to lead worship leaders. And you're going to be one that, you may not be on the center stage, but you're going to be the one that coaches people and bring people up. And you're going to set aside what could be yours for others. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then like, after 15 of those, you're like, yeah, but what? Like, what? It's not happened yet. And then sometimes it's like, is it self-fulfilled? Is it just because someone said that, so I'm going to work hard to make that happen? Or is it, is it the that new ageness where you're, I forget, not return, what's it called? Not the golden rule. I always forget that new age word. When you, I'm talking about, you declare it and it comes back to you.
I think what Jesse was referring to is this book called The Secret, which is just a rehash of the idea of this thing called the law of attraction, which even Wikipedia calls pseudoscientific.
I forget what it's called, but is it that, or is it like, what? Yeah, like what is it, but that's kind of the hard part with the whole charismatic movement is when you see so many prophecies don't come to pass. At some point, you just gotta be like, well, are they false prophets or are they not? And there's an explanation for everything. Like, if there's not a prophecy that comes to pass, it's just like, well, there's practicing. And like, well, how do you practice prophecy? Like, is that in the Bible? And then I just had this conversation with a friend of mine where she still believes in the gifts of the Spirit, and we're working through stuff, just talking with her friendly. Like, she's a fellow Bethel alumni. She went for 1 year. And I asked her, like, how do you deal with that, with prophecy, like with that? Because, like, if you get it wrong, biblically, you're using the Lord's name in vain, which is a sin if you get it wrong. So when you say you encourage people to practice, how are you not just encouraging people to sin? And how is that not a problem? Mm-hmm. Like, when you break it down, that's what's happening. When Bethel just says, just practice it. Like, practice it in your room. Like, we practice in first year all the time. Like, person next to you, practice prophecy. And you're like, okay, but you're just encouraging us to sin. Like, you're just encouraging us to take the Lord's name in vain over and over and over again and get desensitized to the severity of that. And it's just, it's just one of the many things where you look back in hindsight, you're like, how did I not catch that? But you're not explaining, like, prophecy is not explained that way. Like, prophecy isn't you're assigning the Lord's name to it. Prophecy is just an unction in your spirit. It's what your heart feels, and it's to encourage and support people. And it's like, well, yeah, and it gets south really fast.
If you don't define prophecy biblically and give it narrow parameters, then you're just kind of starting with the premise that, hey, we're just kind of making up stuff, and that's okay because we've created this new version of prophecy.
Yeah, and Jeremiah has some stuff to say about the heart.
Right.
That was one of the ones I had to swallow. It's like, go ahead.
Did you ever see that article I wrote? It went really big, but it was a while ago, about the witches that went to Bethel and got prophesied over accurately to continue their witchcraft.
I did. Yeah. I did that one, and some of my fellow alumni, even my friends from my home church are now. This is just show you the severity of the fallout from Bethel's theology. She's now a practicing witch, and she is married to another fellow Bethel alumni who first they were a lesbian couple and then it became a transgender couple. Wow. And she was a youth pastor while practicing as a witch, which I don't know how that works. Wow. But that's one of them was from my home church, and it's like, I mean, if they watch this, I still love you. You're amazing. I mean, I even helped buy an Xbox for them because I love them. But it's one of those things where it's like, that's the fallout of Bethel theology of like, you can't stand on anything. And it's like, not just so far as like, I don't believe in this anymore. It's like the complete opposite. So, there's another former Bethel guy that I'll be doing an interview with as soon as I can. And he has a similar trajectory in terms of being confused, being frustrated, wanting to abandon the faith, leaning and actually moving into atheism, and then eventually coming back to a much stronger faith. But I'd love to talk to him.
That process, talk about the steps that led you away from your faith and actually pushed you towards atheism, and then what brought you back.
Yeah. Well, buckle in. So I was, for those who don't know, I went to Bethel for 3 years. I interned actually on the sound team. I was an audio engineer intern for almost 4 or 5 Bethel albums. Very active in the leadership in the community there as far as audio goes. And then after leaving, I didn't leave Bethel on a bad note. I loved Bethel. I actually left on a good note, moved to Washington State, and kept being involved in Bethel affiliated and type churches as far as even youth ministry or worship pastor roles, kept leading worship for north of 12 years. So I was not just like, I left Bethel and I was done with it. I left it and I was like an ambassador for it and kept going for it. And I would teach classes and be part of conferences and all that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't just like, I'm out of Bethel, I'm done. I kept going. And so that last bit, I was at a church out in Washington State, really north area in Port Angeles, and I was leading worship there. And there was some rough patches here and there in the leadership, just discussing different theologies and stuff, but it wasn't like big stuff. It was just, things we disagreed on charismatic wise. But it got to the point where the worship kept having to be, it was like there's this need for the worship to be so intense. There was one bit I remember where I just admitted that I was having a hard time hearing God. I just told them, hey, I'm just having a hard time hearing God lately. And so a lot of times in charismatic circles with worship, it's the prophetic worship, and prophetic worship is like, making up something on the fly and having these big moments. And I was having a hard time with that. And, I was transparent, and it became like, well, Jesse's not hearing God. He's going through a dry spell. You should lead worship for a little bit. I'm like, whoa. Like, I was just being honest with you guys. And it was like kind of stuff like that kept coming along. But really we got to it was just, I just was getting so burnt out on the emotionalism. And we read a book called, what started it was we read a book called Pagan Christianity. And it's more of a historical breakdown of the historical church, of how it became what it is today. It is biased in a lot of ways. I wouldn't recommend it as far as like, you should go read this, it's great for your faith, but it definitely helped me. What it did for me, it resonated with why I didn't feel like I was fitting in with the church, because it's the first chapter talks about why is it that we get ready for church, we're, screaming at each other, wiping these kids' butts, getting diapers put on, get in the van, everyone's screaming mad, and we get there and we sit and look at everyone's back of someone's head for an hour, and then we leave and we call that community. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly how I feel, because you're just looking at the back of everyone's head, listen to one guy speak, half the time you're not connecting to relating to it. You're disconnected. You're checked out. You're tired, and you're more thinking about lunch. And I'm like, that resonated with me. And then he broke down basically, here's why the current church isn't a really true example of what the historical church looked like. And basically goes through where the church got all of its practices and everything. And it was really good. It kind of gave me a ground of like, okay.
It's just to break in. I read that book actually twice, but it was 12 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great to hear. Yeah.
It's not a book I actually recommend because historically he's making broad brush statements that are way too, he's oversimplifying
I learned that afterwards.
things. Yes. But I think a lot of people came away with this basic idea that, why is this basically a production? And why is this more like a show? And why is this more like a theater? And I think that's the best part of that
right there.
book. But
that was it right there for me.
Yep.
As a worship leader and a worship pastor, that was part of that. Where like you're dealing with a 6-person team and drums and lights and production and 2 soundboards and mixing and live streaming and putting together the set, having to do an hour of worship every Sunday and all that. It was just like, my goodness. And like, and every worship leader gets this point where you're like, I just want to strip it all back down. And it's just like, I want to go back to the heart of worship where it's all about you. Like every worship leader has that moment. It's just like, because it just gets so taxing. It's a full-time job. Like people don't realize to manage a team of people and put together I got to that point where I'm done. And I realized that, I keep knocking this thing. I got to fix that. I realized that all the worship I'm leading, was not very Jesus-centered. That was kind of the first thing. I'm like, this is not Jesus-centered music. It's more like woe is me kind of stuff. And then I need Jesus to rescue me and I'm so much better and I'm so much more powerful and I can move on. So that's where it started. And then from there, it kind of trickled down to, well, what if we did church the more way of the historical way and all that kind of stuff? And that was a whole other debacle. In the end, what happened was I got frustrated with the church. I got frustrated with the production of things. I decided that I had the conversation with my pastor. There was a lot of things I had, problems with prophecy, problems with people getting hurt. We were getting hurt, things we were struggling with. And it really ended with a conversation of like, well, maybe there's some pride things that you need to work on. And I was really trying to swallow my pride and be like, well, maybe there is, because I did have a history of dealing with pride. Like that is something I dealt with. So I really wanted to take that road and be like, okay, maybe that is the case. But I also ended up that conversation. I was like, listen, I put in my notice. I'm done. And I put in I gave them 9 months to figure it out, which is a long time. But the reason is it's hard to find a worship pastor to replace. It's a hard position to fill. So I didn't, and the last worship leaders, they kind of left in 2 weeks out of nowhere and they were kind of left high and dry. I didn't want to do that. So I really wanted to take my time leaving. And about 3 or 4 months into that, that's when I kind of started getting to the atheist phase where I'm just like, I just don't want, I was seeking some sort of help and I'm trying to make the biggest thing was for people to understand, I was trying to make my struggles and my understanding of God and my frustrations of the gifts work within a NAR frame, within a charismatic frame. I didn't have any other framework for any kind of theology. So it was I could go, I'll just be like, if I just study Lutheran or Calvin or whoever it may be, it'll be better. That wasn't an option for me because I just wasn't versed up on it. I always looked at those as dead churches. So for me, it had to work in this framework. And it just kept not working. And I always thought this was the true Christianity because they had the gifts and the miracles and the prophecy. It's like, and this is the living church, not the dead church. So if it doesn't work here, it doesn't work at all. And that was it. That was my problem. And so once I got to that point and I couldn't make it work, I couldn't justify the prophecies, the healings, all that stuff. I just gave up. And a big part of that was, ironically, there was an album just came out by an artist named Derek Webb, who was also a worship pastor, part of a couple big bands back in the early 2000s. And he came out with an album called Fingers Crossed. And it was his first album that came out after he left the church. Because he got caught in an affair and he left the church and he just quit as a worship pastor and he just got a big falling out. It's kind of a big deal in the music industry, the worship music industry. And so he put out this album called Fingers Crossed, and it was basically his deconstruction album. And it probably wasn't the best thing for me to listen to, but it helped. Like, it helped in the way of, like, it put words to what I was going through.
Okay.
Like, it put words to my frustrations. It put words to my heartbreak. Because he was where I was at. And there were so many songs where like,
Right.
there was one line of a song where he says, "In all my empathy to Judas and the devil, they were yours just as much in life as in death. Like a filthy GD trick, I either lose when I follow, or I lose when I sin as well." And so he's basically like, no matter what I do, I'm losing. So I empathize with Judas and the devil, because you created them, you made them, but they didn't end up well. And so they can't win for losing because you designed this whole thing. And I feel like that. Like, I feel like no matter what I do, I'm losing. And like, there's just so many songs where I would just be in my car, or I did a lot of hiking. I'd be in the mountains just bawling my eyes out, being like, why can't I figure this out? And that's where I landed. Like, there just is no God. And I'd actually went hiking with one of my best friends from Bethel, who is now an agnostic kind of. He calls himself a militant agnostic. And I love him. I love him to death still to this day. He's one of my best friends. But he went to Bethel as well, and he left, and he's no longer a Christian. But his thing is, you don't know who God is. I don't know what God is, and you don't either. And that's why he's a militant agnostic. But I went on a hiking trip with him. We're like 15, 20 miles into the mountain. And I'm just bawling my eyes out to him like, I don't know what to do. I just don't know. And he's like, that's fine. Don't know. Just don't know, and be okay with that. And that was good advice for me at the time, of like, I just don't know. And he wasn't trying to shove anything down my throat. He's like, just be okay with nothing. And so that started my atheist phase. But I still had like 4 more months or 5 more months of worship leading to do, even though I was an atheist at that time. So, and I wasn't open about that. I wasn't telling people. I wasn't telling my wife, who's sitting here with my child right now. I wasn't telling everyone that I'm an atheist, but I was definitely just not like engaging. And this is where it got really hairy and really, like, it really kind of opened everything up with the charismatic church and the emotionalism, because you're leading worship, not believing anything in this stuff. But I'm thinking, well, if I just do the right thing, I know how to craft a good set. I know how to set up a good, what instruments to use, what songs to do, what moments to hit. I know I can pre-write some prophetic moments that would seem like prophetic moments. Like, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. Like, I know how to do this stuff. And I'm like, and if it works, it works. I don't have to tell anyone I'm an atheist and leading worship. I'm just going to keep rolling along. Well, I did. And everyone was like, wow, it was so good. It was so amazing. I felt God in that moment. That was amazing. That was so good, Jesse. And that set just hit me in the right way. Wow. You are hearing God in these ways. And I'm like, sure. like, but I'm not, I'm literally just faking it. I'm faking everything. For like 4 months I did this, and it was just like, cool. Now, there'd be some times where I'd be caught. Yeah, go ahead.
I got to ask you, if you can go back in your head to the thoughts you had at the time, do you think that you were 100% faking it, or was there at least some percentage of you that was thinking it might still be true a little bit?
I think there was a bit of hope that wanted it to be true. I would still try to conjure something up in myself, but still, sorry, a little one in the background. I would try to make something happen. And I think there was still there. I wasn't just like 100% nope. And even afterwards, I remember trying to lead worship with some friends and do something, but it was just like, it always fell flat on its face, and there was always that wanting to be more, but it just, and when I say atheist, here's the thing, like, the biggest thing was my mindset, my worldview. So here, let me explain, is that I'm the kind of person I have to go all in on something for me to understand it or to have an opinion on it. I can't just like jump in a little bit. I have to go all in. And so I've lived my life as a Christian. I've dealt with people dying in my family, and I've dealt with struggles and heartache and relationship stuff, and self-identification, like who I am, all that kind of stuff, and personal development, all that as a Christian. And I got to where I'm at now. But now I was like, let's see how this works as an atheist. Like, how do I better myself as an atheist? How do I deal with frustrations as an atheist? How do I deal with raising my children as an atheist? How do I explain morality as an atheist? Like all that stuff. Like, and it's hard. You can't just jump into something. I'm an atheist now. It's like, you have to work through that. And like, okay, what does that look like? What is morality as an atheist? What is good and what is bad? And how do I raise kids with that worldview? And like, how do I explain why you shouldn't hit your sister? As like those kind of things. And so my idea was, I wanted to work through all that stuff with that worldview, and not just, say I don't believe in God. I wanted to actually work through all that stuff. And that's what it was. and you keep hitting these walls, and you find out, okay, well, I have to work through. How does that work? And that's what I mean by that. So, but yeah, so I was in that. But I guess I don't know if that answers your question. But in church, once I got wrapped up with church and got done, we were in the same area, and I just said, what, this year I'm just going to focus on myself. I'm going to focus on business, entrepreneurial stuff. And that's what I did. I focused on my business. I focused on, I've been a barista for almost 12 years. So I launched my coffee business. And this is the first time in my life where I wasn't going to church on Sundays. I wasn't dedicating time for extracurriculars like Bible studies and potlucks and worship practices and all that stuff. It was just, I had so much free time. And I'm like, well, wow, no wonder people don't like going to church. Like, this is amazing. Like, you take church out of the equation and I have so much free time. Like, I honestly didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wake up Sundays and be like, well, what do I do on a Sunday? Like, it was so weird. And so I started working on my business. I launched my Westwood coffee business. It went amazing. I attracted entrepreneurs within the first month, investors in the first month. Business boomed. I was pulling in a couple thousand a weekend just at farmers markets. I was getting invites for events, for weddings. Like, it was everything I wanted it to be. It was amazing. And I'm like, yeah, I don't need God. Like, this is the first time God hasn't been involved in my life, and things are going great. So what's the deal, Like, I'm not that worried about it. And, and then one thing led to another, and fast forward a couple months, and then I really just kind of hit a hard spot with my business, with COVID coming around. My business are getting shut down. In Washington State, things are considered not essential, and that was coming up. Let me fix that a bit. We financially were going through a rough spot. I had my investors lined up, and the investors, they said they caught wind of something. They didn't say what, but basically they backed out. I have a feeling they heard through the grapevine about the COVID stuff. I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling that's what it was, because it was in like February, March. And so we were basically going to launch a brick and mortar business. What happened? I had some investor lined up, and I had to put up a certain amount of money to get it rolling. So I put up about 10, 15 grand to get things rolling. I was also doing real estate at the time as a realtor. So I had some deals lined up. So I had all my financial contingencies just in case. I had my nest egg. And one thing after another happened. So first the investors backed out. And so now I'm left with my pants down, trying to figure out what am I going to do. I couldn't launch the brick and mortar shop. So I'm out all that money. And I'm like, all right, it's all right. I have my closings lined up with real estate. I can do that. All three of those fell through. So I have now no closings. And then all I have is my business that's on the weekends, which can keep my family afloat, but I'm barely surviving there. And then we sold our house to get stuff going, and I was renting, and my renewal was up for my lease in that March. And I was just, and then I had to get a job somewhere, and do the weekend stuff for coffee. So I got a job, and I got hired at a weed farm of all places in Washington State. And they said I was overqualified. They didn't want to hire me. I'm like, I know I'm overqualified. I just need a job. I need something. So I took it, and then they fired me because something happened at the farm and they didn't have any work. So I'm at the end of my rope. And again, I'm dealing with all this as an atheist now. So I'm trying to work through all these struggles, and I'm at my knees. And I'm the kind of person that when I basically get, like, if I see a wall, I just pound through it, and I don't really deal with objections. I just kind of keep working. And it's the first time in my life where I was just burnt out and I was done. Like, I was on my knees, like, I'm done. I quit. I'm done with everything. I just don't want to do it anymore. And then that's when I was like, Kaylee, we got to move back to Delaware. Like, I'm exhausted. We have no family out here. I'm tired. We just had a new baby. Like, you have no help. I have no help. Like, I'm done. I'm just absolutely done. And so that's when we decided to move back to Delaware. And then the day we got back to Delaware, Kaylee was flying. That's when the COVID stuff started. And if I would have stayed in Washington trying to work all that out, we would have been homeless. Like, because every stream of income I had was considered non-essential. So that's how we ended up here in Delaware. Now, also in all that, the thing that kind of ran in parallel. So like dealing with the atheism stuff, working through that, but also running in parallel with that is like trying to figure out just overall religions. And I love studying cults. Just cultish podcast is one of my favorites, but I love studying cults. Scientology, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses. So I started looking more into Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses and like why they believe what they believe. And I started seeing a lot of parallels with Mormons and the Charismatic Church. And this was like really weird for me as someone who's just coming out of the Charismatic. I'm like, whoa, like Mormons believe a lot of this stuff. And this is kind of all happening too. This kind of backtrack, there's a lot to cover here. So to backtrack a little bit, this was all happening while I was still at the church as well. So while I was still leading worship, still a believer, confessional Christian, I'm reading up on all this stuff. And when I started seeing a lot of parallels with Mormonism, that really was like a weird red flag for me. It didn't really fully develop until afterwards, but that was kind of the undertow of the tide, almost like the undertow of like a riptide, where like you think it's the waves that are getting you, but it's actually the undertow that's ripping you out. And so I don't know if you know much about riptide or coast, but like with riptide currents, it's like a crazy when two are coming in like this, and it's causing this gnarly waves crashing one after the other, and you don't go out there during riptide. It's very dangerous. But it's not the waves that get you. There's a whole other current underneath that's just like sweeping you out, and it's wild if you've ever been in one. It's nuts. And you'll look at your towel and your stuff we were at, and then all of a sudden 5 minutes later you're like a half mile down the beach because it's just kept taking you. But that was there the whole time. This undertow of like looking at these cults and Mormonism and stuff, and realizing how much. I go back to Jeff Durbin with Apologia. I would see him debating Mormons on the street. This is why you think that. So that all happened. And so now, fast forward, we're back in Delaware, and I'm like thinking about my faith, and I'm like, gosh, like I went through this whole thing as an atheist, like my worldview, and just like really frustrated with everything. I'm back in Delaware. My home church is here. So maybe I should just go back to my home church. This may help. And we waited out a lot, but the church we just left was very similar to my home church, you know. So now we're like in this, we're really just emotionally, spiritually, just like, just in shatters. Like, I couldn't figure out what to do. Like, just atheism isn't working for me. I'm scared to death to go back to a charismatic church. I don't know what to do there. I want to think about Christianity, but the only Christianity I know seems to be like Mormonism, so that can't be right. And then in comes American Gospel. And that's when we watched that. So we have some friends of ours that left the same church that we were at. And she kept texting us, you gotta watch American Gospel, you gotta watch it. I'm like, I thought about watching it. Like, it's just, I'm already out of the church. What's the point?
Okay.
Like, it didn't seem very relevant. And so finally we got to the point where we watched it. So Kaylee and I put the kids to bed, and we rented it. We're downstairs in the basement of my parents' house watching this movie. And it is like, I can't put into words just the absolute like emotional and spiritual, just like gut check that was. Like, it just hit me so hard because it put me in a place where like I had something I could grab onto, you know. Like, a couple months beforehand, I was listening to Jordan Peterson a lot. I don't know who Jordan Peterson is. He's a psychologist. He's on the Daily Wire now. He's kind of blown up. But years ago, politically, I loved keeping up with politics, and I always loved. He was just a really amazing guy. Had some amazing stuff, and he kind of gave me some good foundations for morality to work with as an atheist. Because one of the things he said, because people thought he was a Christian, he never really said he was. He talks about good and evil, and you know, he actually went through the Bible, which helped me a lot. He went through Genesis. He has about almost 30 hours of lecturing. I listened to all of it, looking at the Bible just as an archetype morality story, not even as faith. And that was cool for me because I could look at the Bible a different way. And when someone asked him, like, are you Christian? He said, I live my life in such a way as if there is a God I'm going to be held accountable to. And I'm like, I could start there. I could put my foot in that camp because at least I know there's an absolute. What that God is, I don't know, but I'll start there. You know, that gave me a little something to work with. And then when we watched American Gospel and going through all that and like all the things, just like I was finally able to say, okay, I think I could be a Christian again. I think I can. Like, this all sounds right. Like, I need this. Like that gospel. I need that gospel. The other gospel I had before, that wasn't working for me. But this gospel, this one that takes the weight off of me, like, I can do that. And that, like, at the end of that, I guess me every time, like, Haley and I were just sitting there bawling our eyes out. Just so mad. Like, so mad at the years wasted, at at the cheap bill of goods we've been sold, at just the amount of time we spent chasing this thing and trying to make it work, and trying to make it work, like trying to figure everything out, and then hearing the gospel for the first, like the real gospel for the first time in 20 years, I guess, of my life as a Christian. I was just wrecked. I was wrecked. I'm like, this is like, how have I not heard this before? Like, how has no one mentioned this before? Like at Bethel, at the churches, at all the conferences I've been to, like I sat under preachings of Sean Boltz and Wesley St. Campbell and Bob Jones and Bobby Connor, and you name the NAR pillar, the NAR bigwig, I either led worship at one of those conferences or I was there. So I've done, like, with Sean Foyt leading worship. I toured with Sean Foyt and traveled all over the place and did all that stuff with him. Like, there is so much that we did. And it's like, how in all of that did this not come across? And it was the first time I could just say, yes, I want to do this. And I had no idea where to start. And so what I did, I just kept watching the American Gospel. I watched it like 10 times.
Really?
And then I knew there was a second. I didn't realize there was a second one. I'm serious. I watched it like 10 times. I just bought it on Amazon, and I would just listen to it like a podcast. Every day I would just listen to it. Because there were so many things that I believed that were so wrong that I had to keep checking in on. Mm-hmm. And then in Christ Alone, or is it Christ Crucified? I forget which was the second one. Yeah. Then I realized there's a second, which is like almost 3.5 hours long. And then I dove into that one, and that one is like much heavier. There's so much more theological meat in that one. And then I did the same thing. I must have listened to it like 6 or 7 times, because I just had to keep reminding myself, okay, this is what the gospel is. I couldn't recite a gospel message. I couldn't do it because I would keep integrating NAR theology into it.
Interesting.
And so I just keep listening to, like, Paul Washer just beat me up and Vodi Bakum just beat me up. And I loved it. I was like, gosh, I need this. I so need this, because I keep going back to that old theology. But every time I listen to it, I could pick out more where I was messing up and what I was doing wrong. And it's just, and that's where we got to the point where I then started reading more theology and doing my more, like, as a husband, and I started doing Bible or Sunday schools with my kids. That was the most therapeutic thing out of the whole process. And I kind of mentioned that on the original interview I did with Andreas, is that, like, when I try to get back into my faith and be the leader of the family, kids like, I want you to lead us. And I'm like, I want to lead you guys too, but I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, every time I read the Bible, I feel like I'm being a narcissist. Like, I can't read it without, I didn't even know how to read the Bible. I was scared to read the Bible, because every time I read it, all I knew was the sermon, the hundreds and thousands of hours of sermons I've read on each scripture. So I couldn't read anything right. It would just always be a narcissistic interpretation of it. And so, like, so when I started doing Sunday school with my kids, so we weren't going to a church yet, tried going to the one church I grew up in like once or twice, and I just, like, I can't do this. It's just too much. So then I started doing Sunday school with my kids, and that was like the most therapeutic thing, because I just have to read the lessons, and it was a really good based Sunday school. That was just basic catechismic teaching for children, and I just read through that, and I was like, I'd be reading it crying, learning stuff off these Sunday school messages, because that's what it felt like. I was back to square one, like, going from atheism, like charismatic, to atheism, to realizing, like, Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses, all this stuff that's wrong, and then agnostic, and then, like, okay, this is where I'm at. I just had to relearn everything. And then I started reading more books. I started going through Luther's small catechisms. Remy Shepherd from Lutheran Answers, he has a podcast he did. He helped me a lot with some good guidance to start. And then finally we started going to the Mennonite church that runs the school I grew up going to, and that's been, like, great, and that's where we're at now. But yeah, that's kind of the short version of it. There's a whole lot more in this, but essentially that was what that process looked like, going from charismatic poster child to to here. So yeah,
I'd like to, going off of what you just said, you made it really clear that you were now hearing the gospel, and you hadn't heard it before.
Yeah.
Tell me what that means. What is the gospel now compared to what did you think it was?
Oh man, that's a good question. The gospel previously to me was how much I'm worth and how much I'm valued, and kind of how Todd White would say how heaven went bankrupt to save you. That's your worth, and how and it was a very just man-centered gospel,
right?
Of how lucky am I? There was this how lucky am I to partner with God, but also there was a part of how lucky God is to partner with me,
right?
How we get to work. There's a lot of things God can't do in the charismatic church, and they won't tell you that. But God can't send revival unless this happens.
Mm-hmm.
God can't heal someone unless you do this. God can't change a city unless this happens. There's a lot of can'ts. But if you ask someone in the charismatic movement or in our movement, can God do anything that he wants? Oh, absolutely.
Right.
They'll 100% say that. And I would say the same thing. But, I would argue majority of the sermons and conferences are revolved around what God can't do until this happens. I was just listening to Dawn Hill's podcast that she just did on the communion revival. How, we need to see these things happen. We need to have these giant synergistic communions where churches from all around the world are doing communion together to see this happen. Well, you're saying that this can't happen unless we do this.
Right.
And so the gospel was almost centered around a lot of that, of how a lot of the God can't do this unless this happens, And so it really becomes a works-based gospel. And they wouldn't say that because they don't think it's not a salvation issue if you don't do this. But it becomes so works-based if you want to see the kingdom move, if you want to see things happen, if you want to see you insert revival or healing or miracle happen here, you should have X, Y, and Z happening, And that's what people get exhausted from.
Right.
And so you take out the sovereignty of God, and you make God very dependent on you. If you want to see the kingdom move, we need to be laborers with Christ and see things happen. Does that make sense? And so the gospel wasn't this just it wasn't the five solas at all, but yeah. And so it just, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a gun to your head. You get 3 sentences. What is the gospel? Okay,
what is the gospel? Gun to my head. Okay, make sure I do this right. Gotta make
a rhetorical gun. It's not a real gun.
Yeah. The gospel is, I am saved by faith alone, by grace alone, through Christ alone, according to the scripture alone, to the glory of God alone, which means that by the grace of God, he has sent his son to save me in my sin and pull me out of the death that I am in and into life with him, of nothing of my works, but unto his, through his grace that is just all encompassing and for his glory alone.
Okay, you pass. I'm not gonna use the gun.
I think I got it.
The thing,
okay.
The whole, I did a whole series on EGTV, and it's also part of our Patreon package where I try to give people a background in understanding the role of revivalism in American evangelicalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my reading, I got just a stack of books about the history of the evangelical church, going back to really it's the late 1730s.
Yeah.
Especially with Whitefield.
Is it like God's Generals and stuff like that?
No, I'm talking about real books.
Yeah.
Those are pretend books.
That was required reading at Bethel.
I know, it's terrible. Revivalism and American evangelicalism are the same animal. They're the same. There's no distinction between the two. So the idea that we have to somehow get people to some kind of a meeting or a church service so that they can make a decision, so that they can raise their hand, so that they can ask Jesus in their heart or something like that is so foundational. And once you get the gospel, once you make a decision, now the rest of your life is basically doing stuff to basically pay back God for what he did for you. And I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but there's a quote, and I'm pretty sure it's Dr. Michael Horton in the American Gospel, where he says, The gospel is what Jesus has done. It's not what we are supposed to be doing.
Yes.
Well, I almost got that quote correct, but not really. Here's the actual quote.
Jesus says, I have accomplished salvation. Not come help me save the world, but I have accomplished this. The law basically is due. The gospel basically is done. The gospel isn't what would Jesus do, now go and do that. The gospel is what has Jesus done, now believe that.
And when anybody is...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
that sums it up so well.
And it's a message that is completely independent of us, whether we do miracles or not, whether we live really holy lives or not, whether we speak clearly or we fumble, whether we play the instrument well and sing beautifully or not. All that is totally irrelevant. The message stands alone. The message of the gospel is Christ came, he died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sin. We deserved hell. We deserved the punishment that is, it only makes sense. If God is holy and we're sinful human beings who are unholy, we deserve God's punishment.
Yeah.
And instead of punishing us, he took that punishment on himself. And for the longest time, even going back to when Paulette and I first got married, before we even had kids, we were going to a small church. And I remember the pastor at that time was introducing these new things. We got to dress up, church. We got to do this new thing. This is back in the late 80s. And I remember saying very clearly, it seems like the gospel is pretty simple. Mm-hmm. We just need to keep hearing it and declaring it and saying it and reminding ourselves of what we already know. The idea that it's, I got that. Let's move on. Let's add some new things on top of that thing. When I think about Bethel, I've actually heard Bill Johnson for about 0.1% of a speech mention that, Jesus died for our sins. He does say that.
Yeah, but you have to listen to a lot of stuff. But then he adds all this other stuff on top of it that becomes so much more important that the actual gospel is completely buried and irrelevant at that point. Yeah, and that's actually a big part of what happens at Bethel is that it's kind of assumed that when you go to school of ministry there that you're already a Christian and you got the basics figured out, the basics being the gospel. Like you have this stuff figured out. Now let's go into the big stuff. Like let's do the deep dive into the really fun, cool stuff about Christianity. But the gospel, it's kind of assumed that you know all that. And so now that you know all that and that you have an understanding of that, we're going to talk about all the other stuff, which is like the miracles, the prophecies, the words of knowledge, the worship, the evangelism and power evangelism. And that's everything else. The gospel is just the entry level. Everything else is, and then Bill even talk about like how the gospel without miracles is kind of a weak gospel. It's an empty gospel. That's what they teach. And so it's, that's what happens there.
Right.
That's exactly what happens there. You nailed it.
You have described in your life, I think, a template for a lot of people's lives. A lot of people are excited by this new thing that's supposed to be happening. They're brought in by the excitement, especially if you've been told from the get-go that, well, there are those other Christians out there and they're the bad Christians because they're dead. Their churches are dead. Yeah. Feel sorry for them. Have pity on them.
Yeah.
And so you're lucky because you're with us and we're the really good Christians. And it's this elitism, which is, it's not on the surface elitism. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like, well, no, we're just really excited and we're doing the stuff that the other people aren't doing. And don't you want to be part of the
question,
kind of the cool kids?
That's asked is like, the question that's asked is like, is it a spirit-filled church? Like, are they spirit-filled at that church? And that's the question that gets asked a lot. And you're like, oh, I mean, I asked it. I'd be like, is this like, for instance, if I was asked to cover someone that was going to lead worship, say I was leading worship at my church and the pastor was going to be out and he said, hey, can you lead worship for me this Sunday? I'd be like, yeah. What kind of church? Are you guys kind of like a spirit-filled church or what do you think? And like, oh, I mean, we're not like that. So just keep it kind of reined in. So like, all right, that means don't go, hog wild on the emotionalism. Keep it pretty tame. Verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, end. Like that's the format I'm going to follow. One live one medium one gentle closer, and then one medium one at the end. Like that's how I would arrange the set, and I would that's how it'd be. But absolutely, it's like, are you spirit filled? Is it extra churches? There is a bit of an elitism. Like they have something that we don't have, kind of, or we have something they don't have, and it's just like it's absolutely what happens for sure. And also, I would say with Bethel too. Sorry, the thing I would say, like you were talking about how a lot of people like the roadmap as far as what I went through. I mean, it's by the grace of God that I came out honestly the way I did, because a very large handful of my fellow alumni have left the faith and or just New Age or Eastern religion. And so like, and being out for so long, for like 10, 15 years out of Bethel, and I always felt like I was the long-standing one that was like, I made it. Like I held on to my faith and I didn't think it would happen to me, because all the other ones were kind of falling away bit by bit. And I was the one where I'm like, I'm still holding strong, man. Like I still got my faith. And so when that moment came to me, I was terrified. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm here now.
And this really speaks against the Bethel narrative. It's the New Apostolic Reformation narrative, and that is, we're the ones finally doing it. We're the ones who have the power.
Yeah.
And because we have the power, we're not going to have the problems of those old fuddy-duddy churches. We're not going to have our kids abandoning their faith. We're not going to have the numbers dwindling. But the truth is, that's exactly what's happening. And you're part of the generation that, it's my kids' generation, who all went to all the super spiritual youth camps and the youth events and the concerts, and most of those kids have all left their faith as well. And so it was about a 10 year ago time frame where I, as at the time late 40s, I'm thinking, I don't know what to believe anymore, because I see this happening. We were told that this thing is just, it's a snowball going downhill. It's going to be amazing. You know, this revival is right around the corner. Things are looking great. And then it didn't happen.
Well, that's undeniable. It's like, it's this undeniable thing of like, this is so good. How could you, why would anyone leave this? This is the absolute truth. Like, this has to be, you know, it becomes this thing of like, why would anyone leave this? And that's when you start realizing, like, when you, again, like you're saying, when you start seeing the prophecies not fulfilled, when you start seeing healings not happen, and there's no really good explanation, you're kind of left with, you got to justify it. Either, like, you're talking about the difference in the gospels. It's like between the Nar gospel and the true gospel, you get this point where it's like, well, either I'm wrong or the Bible's wrong. And you have to figure out, like, who's in the wrong here. That can't be the man of God, can't be the prophet. He's the prophet. Can't be the Bible, because the Bible's the Bible. So then it's got to be me. I'm the one messed up here. Yeah. And then at that point, that's when you get introspective, and you just like, well, if I'm the one that's messed up and I've done everything I thought I could, I guess I'm just not one of the people that are meant to be healed. I'm not one of the people that are meant to be prophesied over or saved or whatever. So if I'm not one of them, then I'll see you guys later. That's kind of what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a real typical response. I think for the person, I was not the person who was super emotional at church. I was buying into everything. I was on the worship team just like you. I was really involved in getting people emotionally elevated. I mean, we called it the Holy Spirit, but now I know it's just what musicians do, whether you're a Christian or not. You can use music to get people to feel certain things. Yeah.
Oh, man, living in Washington State, that's exactly what happened to me when I would be like, this became more and more clear. There's a really amazing band called Explosions in the Sky. They're like an all-instrumental band. There's no words or anything, but absolutely just beautiful music to write to, to listen to run to. It's just soundtrack, epic music. And I love them. They're not Christian by any means, but it's just beautiful music. And so I went to one of their concerts in Seattle, and it's it's a Capitol Hill block party, which is like a basically outdoor event. It's Seattle, so there's like, it's weed smoke everywhere, and everyone's drunk, and I'm out there just like there for the show. They have a song called "First Breath After a Coma." It has this just amazing, just climactic build. Like musically, I mean, you'd appreciate it. It's just like absolutely gorgeous build, right? And it was their encore kind of finished song, and they're getting through this build part where everything's just building and building, and people just start raising their hands. they just start raising their hands. Like they didn't know what to do with it because it was such a pull. Like you had to physically respond to it. Like it was such a pull. It's so beautiful. So they're just raising their hands. And here I am thinking like, sweet, they're worshiping God in this. It's like, no, it's just the natural reaction when you hear something so beautiful and pulling and emotional and like, it just makes you want to do something. And like, we just saw that. And so not to cut you off, but that's like, yeah, that's exactly what was happening. It's just like, you just have these physical responses and you start seeing them at like, secular concerts. You're like, oh, maybe it isn't the Holy Spirit.
And I think the right way to look at it, and I think about these things a lot because I'm an artist and a musician. A lot of people watch my YouTube channel. I don't bring it up that much because I'm so focused on discernment and theology and stuff. But really, my heart as a human being is so involved in art and music, and I think about that a lot. I really think that music is a gift from God that He gave us so that we could inspire people in worship. I think, especially Western music, going back to the Baroque period, especially Bach. There's a core of it that really it ties into good biblical theology, very much so. But you can take those elements and you can use those, strip away all the Christianity, and still have people have a wonderful experience. They can feel a sense of community. And honestly, if you've gone to a church where everyone is a hypocrite and everyone is irritating and you're disappointed because you were told church was going to be this, and this, and it's really not, why wouldn't you go to a concert where you can have all those good feelings without all the hypocritical nonsense? Yeah.
Have a beer, have all good stuff, and just have a good time. So actually, it's kind of ties in funny. So the guy that I was listening to, Derek Webb, who had that Deconstruction album, he has a song. Actually, let me see here if I can pull up the lyrics real quick, because it wrecked me the first time I heard it, because it was one of those things. I started bawling my eyes out when I heard this song.
While you're on that thought, I want to. Before you read it, one of the things I wanted to say about your process that I think is really instructive, because it's similar to what I went through, completely different pattern of how things happen and all that. But I very deliberately, when I was confused by all the things that I was observing, I said, I don't know what I believe anymore for sure. Maybe I'm not supposed to be a Christian at all, but at least maybe the Roman Catholics are right. I don't know. I've always been told that they're wrong.
You kind of start reaching out to everything. Like who was it? Who got it right?
And the reason I'm saying that is not because I want people to become Roman Catholics, because I do disagree with Roman Catholic theology. But I think the more you're willing to say, I want to start over again, I want to strip back everything that I just assumed to be true, I think the more firm your faith can become. But you're going to have to really take responsibility in order for that process to do what it can do. And in other words, if you're going to hold on to most of your pre-existing ideas, which you were, by the grace of God, wise enough to realize, I can't hold on to my pre-existing NAR ideas because they don't work. Yeah. So now what? You stripped it all away and you start over.
I tried to for the longest time, but you're right, it didn't. And my hand was forced, because the deeper I got into it, the more exposed it became. I was like, at that point. Right. But yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, but so what you were saying though, like with the music and the emotional pull, that was like a big thing, like as a musician, as a songwriter, and I wrote probably a good 10, 15 worship songs, and that we'd lead worship at churches, recorded some of them, like. So this Derek Webb guy, he wrote a song that speaks exactly to the idea of the emotionalism, right? So I'm going to read these lyrics to you real quick. Just think about it. And when you hear the song is written in the same kind of chord progression style as a worship song. It's like a 1, a 4, a 1, a 5, a 1, a 4, a 1, a 5. So like has that typical, worship feel. And so when you hear the lyrics, it sounds like a worship song. Okay.
That chord progression is the favorite one for the lead guitar player, which was my favorite thing to do. to just
Oh, yeah.
improvise over, you know, where everybody's swaying back
Oh,
and
yeah.
forth, and I'm
Easy
playing
to.
those sweet notes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Oh yeah. So he wrote this song in that way, and like that's why I love this song so much, because this song is like the lyrical audio embodiment of the in between phase of that, of like being not sure where you're at and stuff. So he says the first verse is, "Help me to forget all of my regret. I know you're strong enough to do the job."
You're strong enough to do the job.
You go by many names, forever stay the same. Your promises I claim.
You're all I've got.
You're all I've got. We gather here because we know
Because we know
there's nowhere else that we can go
nowhere else
where we can really be free.
really free.
So this sounds like the intro to a worship song, right? And then he says, "So we raise our voice, we raise an offering. Would you come near and quench our thirst? Oh, lift our hearts as the Spirit bears the curse. We depend on you. We know that you'll come through. We feel it instantly when you move. It's more than chemistry, more than community. You enter into me. You're in my veins. You bear the weight of all our grief, uncertainty, and unbelief. Oh, you restore our sanity. So we raise our voice. We raise an offering. Would you come near and quench our thirst? Oh, lift our hearts as the Spirit bears the curse." So all this sounds like almost like a hymn, you know? So far, would you agree? Like a worship song?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now this is where the song hits me. So then the bridge hits. He says, "Now my knees are weak, my speech is slurred. Oh, the things you shake, oh, the things you stir. I'm calling out the only name that delivers me from my guilt and shame." And I'm like, holy cow, in this, and I'm hearing this, right? So I'm just like, listen to this song. Right? So I'm thinking this whole time, like, this is what it is, right? Production wise, the song takes a break and just cuts off. So he's like, "We're calling out the only name that delivers me from our guilt and shame." And it comes out.
My guilt and shame.
And it just goes, "Alcohol." And the whole song is about alcohol. The whole song. And I'm like, oh, man. Like, and then I'm bawling. My heart just sank because I'm like, this guy, he's taken everything that the church provided for him.
Wow.
And it's at the bar now. And then when you go back to the verses and reading them again, you go back to those verses and it all makes sense because it's about alcohol. Help me to forget all of my regret. I know you're strong enough to do the job. You go by many names, forever stay the same. You're all I've got. And I'm like, and then the song, "As the Spirit bears the curse." He's talking about
That's
spirits.
crazy.
Alcohol bears the curse. I was just like, so as a songwriter, I'm just like, just blown away. What an incredible song. As someone going through deconstruction, I'm wrecked because I'm just like, yeah, because I was drinking more at that time. I was drinking more beer at the time. And so I'm just like, this is exactly what I'm going through. But that's what I'm saying. Like, we're talking about the emotional pull and stuff. That song, I'm listening to the song and I'm going back to my worship leader status. I'm going back to, I'm like, and I feel like I'm worshiping at this point. Like, wow. Oh, like I had this moment of like, I feel so good again. I'm feeling like I'm actually going back to that root. And then he hit that bridge and he sings it like a hallelujah chorus. But it's just, they're just saying alcohol. We raise our voice to alcohol. We raise your name to alcohol. And I'm like, and I'm bawling my eyes out. But yeah, that song just blew my mind. Just absolutely blew my mind. Didn't know what to do with it.
I remember the name Derek Webb, and I think I might even have. Was he always by himself, or was he also part of a group?
He was part of a group. I can't remember the name. I'm sure if I did a quick Google search, I could find it. But there was a group he was a part of.
Caedmon's Call?
Caedmon's Call. That's it. Yep. He was the rough front man for Caedmon's Call.
Wow.
Yep. It's that guy.
That was a very prominent band.
Yes. And he went through all that stuff, and he's a very outspoken deconstructionist, and that's him. Caedmon's Call. That's it.
The role of mysticism is so big
Yeah.
it's a really difficult topic to cover because it's like the whole thing. The idea that every Christian, you got the gospel when you became a Christian. That was a long time ago. Who cares? No big deal. That's over and done with. We don't need to talk about it. Now it's time for you to have all of this direct access to God where you can hear new things. And then as a worship leader, it's one thing to be a musician, but to be the worship leader, you're supposed to be hearing God in a really unique way that gives you the ability to lead everybody else so that they'll have a mystical experience. Talk about pressure.
Yeah. Talk about pressure. That's exactly it. It's yeah, that's exactly it. It's like it becomes this thing where you have to like, you really have to deliver. Like, and people don't just want a worship set. They want to like be on their knees, bawling their eyes out. And so you're working on trying to find the songs that deliver that. And it's kind of what feeds into it, honestly. When you think about worship music and how it just kind of like got more and more and more intense, it's for that very reason. People wanted to deliver more on the emotional experience. And so songs then became written more and more to deliver on the emotional experience. If you look at Bethel's early stuff, it was very standard worship music. But the more and more it got into the emotionalism, and the more and more got into the intensity of a worship set, the bigger the production got, and the bigger the builds got, and the longer the bridges got, and they would just become like these massive like 2-minute builds with like, you know, an extra tom player and glockenspiel and a synth waves and 2 guitarists and just all this stuff. And it became that because that's what people kept. It's like a drug, you know, like the original hit just wasn't big enough.
Yeah.
And so songs had to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like You Make Me Brave and, you know, it is their rendition of It Is Well, how it just gets massive. Or like, I mean, you just take any song off a track, it just gets huge. And it's because, reason why, if you strip those songs down and lyrically just read them, they'd have zero impact on you. If you just read, You Make Me Brave, You Make Me Brave, You Call Me Out Beyond the Shore and the Wave, You Make Me Brave, You Make Me Brave. Like that has no, as an artist, that has zero impact on me. But when you surround that with like the scaffolding and the support of the production that is Bethel, all of a sudden declaring You Make Me Brave is like an emotional just roller coaster, you know? Whereas like you go to a traditional hymn or something.
And it's...
Yeah, go ahead.
You're singing about yourself too. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
How is it worship when you're talking about yourself?
Well, yeah.
I mean, you are talking about what you believe God is going to be doing in you, but still...
Yeah.
When we started going to our Lutheran church and singing out of a hymnal again,
Oh, yeah.
I had no problem with it whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I was done with being on the cool worship team.
It's
being
refreshing.
The cool guy playing cool music. I just wanted good.
Yeah, it's so refreshing.
That's a good word for it. And another thing that ties into the issue surrounding that is because we've been told that church has to be always surprising and new, and you got to stay out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
We've become, I think, not we now, but I mean, in that environment, you don't want comfort and regularity because you've been told that those things are bad.
Yeah.
That if you're comfortable, that's bad. If you feel safe and you have a sense of I know what to expect when I go to church, that's all bad. It's always got to be this new thing.
Yeah.
And to some extent, yeah, we shouldn't take our faith for granted. We shouldn't take church for granted. We shouldn't just go there just because it's just the thing we do. Nobody says that. But when I started to see that the entire church service could serve the purpose of granting peace.
Yeah.
So that when you go to church, the world is a mess. The world is a train wreck. The world is an emotional roller coaster. Church is not.
Yeah.
Church is the place where you know what's going to happen. You're going to receive the gospel. You're going to hear the word of God.
There's an actual sanctuary.
No games. There's no comedy routine. It's a sanctuary, right? It's a safe place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you start with that, I have a friend who was a youth group leader in campus life back in the 80s who went on to become to go back to his Lutheran faith and become a Lutheran pastor. He, for years, I want to have him on my show. He's been a what do you call it? A chaplain at a major university for the Missouri Synod. And when he first started doing that, he thought, do I need to get people playing guitars and stuff? Do we got to sing the latest songs?
Yeah.
And he said, you know what? I'm gonna do worship services out of the Lutheran hymnal, which is the service book.
Yeah.
Which has an order of worship that everybody's familiar with. And he said that he had some of the college kids saying to him, "Oh, thank goodness. I was afraid you were going to try to modernize and have all this, new stuff." We're talking like, this is back in the 90s.
Yeah. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Prime.
The temptation was already there for him to modernize.
Yeah. Well, that was like when we started.
This idea that
we started going to Mennonite church. That was the same thing happened to us, because it was all back to like, I remember our first service there. It literally was just them with a tuning pitch, like a pitch harmonica, and they hit the note,
right?
And then,
no instruments,
and we just start singing. And I was just like, man, this is. And we tried like one of the songs. We tried doing "Be Thou My Vision," and I couldn't get through "Be Thou My Vision," because like it got that line where it says, "Riches I need not, nor vain empty praise, or man's empty praise." Thou my inheritance now and always, thou and thy only, first in my heart. And I couldn't get through it because I'm like, I'm still struggling with needing man's empty praise. Like I was like, I feel like I still need that, but that's the song doing what it's supposed to do, convicting me. Like that's the song checking my heart.
Yes.
I'm like, it's just saying "You make me brave" doesn't check no one's heart. But saying like trying to sing a song where it's like, or come thou fount, like trying to say, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. It's like, confessing that of like, I am prone to mess this up. I'm prone to, or saying that, let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. I always just was too proud to even look up what those words mean. And then once I actually looked it up, realizing that a fetter is like a slave chain, like a prison chain. Like what it's saying is that like chain me to your goodness. Let your goodness anchor me to you. It's like, that preaches. Like, let your goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Because I'm prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. I'm prone to leave the God I love. It's like, that is worship. That is humility and confession and saying like, I need you more than ever. But then we just say God's love is reckless. It's like, oh God, no. Heavens no. Like that's a whole nother song you could talk about of how like I led that song tons of times. I thought it was great. It wasn't until I heard Mike Winger breaking down, here's why it probably isn't the best idea, is God's love reckless. And I had to seriously think about like, to say God's love is reckless is the antithesis of the gospel, because he was so intentional. He wasn't reckless with it. He was so intentional. And like, it's just stuff like that like I look back on, I'm like, Kaylee and I both are just like, how did we sing that? How did we do that? But you grow and you learn.
Yeah. And you thank God and you say, this is the demonstration of God's grace in my life that I'm even here today talking this way. And
yeah.
And it feels good to admit you made a bunch of mistakes, doesn't it? And to just stop putting up this front that, hey, I'm a victorious Christian. Just
yes. Oh, I love it. I love, like, especially when I mess up or something goes wrong. It's like I'm no longer in the spot of like I'm trying to, and I can move on from that. But I'm no longer being like, I gotta pray more. I gotta do this more. If I would have done this more, I wouldn't have messed up that up there. It's like, no, it's like I'm prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. It's like, I feel that. And thank God for your grace every day.
And then you go back to be at peace.
Mm-hmm.
All of your sins have been paid for on the cross.
Yes.
it's been done. Mm-hmm. It is finished.
Yes. Yes.
And you don't have the sense of, I got to muster more emotion up. I got to try harder. I got to go save the world.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this has been really good. I'm so glad we talked, and I want to do this again with you, young man.
Yes, I would love that. Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to more of this. I'm looking forward to joining the ranks of the amazing YouTubers on YouTube, such as yourself. I'm looking forward to putting more stuff out, and gosh, the more I hear about people talking about coming out of Bethel, I feel like I just have a really good opportunity with everything, just to really talk through with people and to help people process coming out of the charismatic movement.
Right.
And hopefully, by the grace of God, saving more people out of it. Like giving people, much like how Derek Webb's album, as unhealthy and bad as it was a place for me to relate to. Although it sent me down the path of atheism, I want people to have to skip that phase and not have to go through a point where they basically deny God entirely. Yeah. I would love to see that happen, because usually once people get to that point, they're done. Like, they're done.
Yeah.
And I want to try to keep people from getting there. So yeah.
That's excellent. That's exactly what I haven't done it yet, but I really want to make a more complete introductory video for my channel so that people know exactly what I'm trying to do. I want to expose bad teaching and help people retain their faith. Because if all you do is expose the bad, the bad, it can lead people away from their faith completely, so that they just abandon it.
Yeah, they're like, well, gosh, if you think this is all so terrible, why are you still here?
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you always go back to the gospel then. You go back to, God has given us his word. He has given us this truth, that he loves us so much that he died on the cross for our sins, and that's enough. That foundation is enough for us to live our entire lives on. So, okay, I'm going to go before we talk anymore.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it.